I'm joined in the studio now by the head of advocacy at the Institute for Public Policy Research, Rachael Heaton. Rachael, thank you for waiting patiently on this very quick breaking news day. Tony Blair, education, education, education. A lot of people are fearing Andy Burnham's going to be taxation, taxation, taxation. This is a severe attack to the left. 50p tax rates was never in the manifesto.
Look, I'd like him to focus on tax fairness. Not all tax is made equal. It doesn't affect people in the same way. So I think we can all recognise that ordinary people are feeling really squeezed, but there are really sensible ways of raising billions in tax without hitting ordinary people. That's because we have an incredibly unfair, dysfunctional tax system where huge corporations and very wealthy people pay way lower rates of tax than ordinary people. So if the government really does want to get serious about giving people some relief on the cost of living with energy bills, with housing costs and fixing social care and all of these things, it's likely that they will need to raise some money. But I think there's eminently sensible ways to do it without hitting working people. We can get some of those vested interests paying some more money where we know that it's going to be fair to do so.
But top rates taxpayers are working people. They already pay, the top 10% of tax earners in the UK already pay 60% of all taxes. Wealth taxes don't work. You introduce them in places like France, then your wealthiest clear off. There's a lot of evidence to show tax revenue goes down if you increase tax.
So look, I would actually look at income from assets and some of these incredibly dysfunctional taxes like our property tax system, council taxes. That is a huge public policy failure. We at the moment have a system where a semi house, very ordinary house in the northeast is paying less tax than a mansion in the southeast. That just cannot be right. So I don't think we necessarily need to even look at income tax in the first instance. I would actually look to taxes like that. Property taxes, capital gains tax, a tax on banks. It's not stealth taxes. And I actually don't think the government should be ashamed about it, because I think that you can do all of these things in a way that is actually good for growth. Because what we have at the moment is we have distortions, inequities and loopholes that actually really push businesses to make decisions on the basis of these inequities in the tax system rather than growth, productivity enhancing, mechanisms. So I think it's much better for the government to be upfront about it and say that these things have been very unfair. There have been public policy failures and we're going to tackle them because we're on ordinary people's side.
What happens, Rachael, when wealth taxes, mansion taxes start making pensioners homeless? Because that's what happens in places like France. People who are asset rich and cash poor suddenly find that they have a huge asset and their council tax goes to frightening levels, the likes of which they've never been faced with their entire lives. It would be a disaster. It would be cruel.
That is often a concern that's put across. And look, France's wealth tax, some of the concern with that was that it was levied at a very low rate. I think what we have at the moment is we have a council tax system, essentially a property tax system, that really doesn't make any differentiation, for example, on a property that is worth 2 million versus 20 million. That's actually incredibly different rates. So I think we can actually do really sensible things that won't penalise people. But I also think that we need to be honest about sometimes society does need to change. Sometimes, it might not make sense for older people to stay in houses for really long waits of time. If somebody's living in a 10-bedroom house and they're one person.
That'd be pretty unlikely and pretty rare. And a lot of people...
I agree. And there's ways that you can protect against
a lot of older people want the dignity of staying in the home of their lifetime without being forced to move out by a left-wing government. That's not fair.
Look, the other thing that I would honestly say is all of these difficult situations with the tax system, we have millions of taxes that are totally dysfunctional and could really raise billions. So property tax is one, but also capital gains tax at the moment. People are earning, people who earn their money from investments, from assets, are paying far lower rates of tax than ordinary workers. But that cannot be right.
But so if equity with income tax was applied to capital gains tax in Britain, we would have the highest wealth taxes in all of Europe. People would leave the country.
But what you should do, and the reason that a higher rate would be justified. You could have a system like Thatcher's Chancellor, Nigel Lawson, had, where you protect investment. So it's a real growth enhancing mechanism. The money that investors are putting in is protected. That actually really will incentivize growth, incentivize people who are genuinely doing productive investment. But it will take some of the people who are really gaming the capital gains tax system and are essentially taking their labour, their income, they are kind of swindling it and using it in a way to essentially use that lower rate of capital gains tax. That is something that 70% of the capital gains tax system does at the moment. And we don't, that
Rachel,
isn't a good thing for
Rachel
business
Heaton,
or growth.
superb.